it's recording. Okay. So on Moodle here, we'll see how this works. Under schizophrenia, which is our next topic, here's the poll. And then these are the 3 possibilities. And so if you click on the poll, thank you, you can click which one you most want. And I guess I'll just before class Tuesday make a decision. So if you're going to vote, vote by Monday. And it may or may not be totally democratic. It's going to be based on how many people actually voted. So this one, very briefly, these 2 are experimental, and then this is like a review article. So, but then again, the articles are here if you want to like look in more detail to look at the abstract or something. Okay. Any questions on anything before we get started? Where did we leave off?
Cover the rest of this.
Here. That we only have we have a small number of classes left.
4.
I think we only, 4. That you know? You're just counting down the days there? Cool. Are you excited? It's like the details of Cool Nose are like very unpredictable.
That was actually a wild guess.
Was it?
Yeah.
I think it was exactly right.
I meant to say 4 weeks.
Oh, no, I think we have one more day of hunger and eating, then I think it's a day of schizophrenia, a day of affective disorders, and a day of anxiety disorders, and I think that's it. And then the exam.
Graduate. Neuroscience degree is not going to get you a job. Fantastic.
It can get you a job.
You got Alan the job.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Almost all the neuroscience majors that graduated last year are employed.
How many were there?
9. Most of them are working at research labs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So Alan is like, it is not at a
How many
university, but
neuroscience majors were there last?
9.
You said that.
She just saying numbers.
Dorothea works at a lab at Ohio State. Soyu's at UPenn. Fadi's at Thomas Jefferson. It's like at another lab at a hospital.
Georgetown.
Nee's at Georgetown.
Master's in the Lisbon Neuroscience lab.
Yeah, he may have. Yeah, I think he may have changed
Just
labs,
changed.
but then he's going to start a master's neuroscience program in the fall. I guess Diane is not in a neuroscience job right now, but she's going to start nursing school soon. Who else is there? I guess I don't know what Moose is doing. I know he was applying for some jobs, and I'm not sure what Tim's doing. Am I forgetting someone?
Just a few years back, there was someone who got a job as doing autopsies, basically.
Oh, that was and he quit that job.
Oh.
But now he's working at he's working at a lab at Ohio State now. But yes, that is true. I don't know. He was applying, because he actually graduated in December. So he was applying for, I know he's applying for jobs recently, because I wrote, as a reference, I wrote him a letter or something, but I don't remember. Is that where he is? Yeah, a lot of people ask me for letters. That's how I know what people do. Not because they actually want me to know. I'm just kidding. Okay. Did we do this slide? No, we didn't. I just we ended when I talked about strippers earning more money when they ovulate. So some texts will say that human sexual behavior is not influenced by hormones or pheromones or the menstrual cycle. But that's not really true. It depends on what the measures are that you look at. I mean, in one way, humans are unique compared to other organisms, because some organisms, like, it's virtually impossible for them to be sexually active if the female is not in a fertile phase. Mm-hmm.
Question. The existence of pheromones in humans has not been verified, right? There's not, like, consensus.
I think that's probably fair to say. I guess what I would say is I think that there are a number of studies that point that there are pheromones, but no chemicals have been identified. So I guess that's like definitely there has not been a chemical that has been identified that's like this is a pheromone, but there are behavioral evidence that indicate that probably some exist, but we have no clue what they are or how they work. So if you so humans are kind of unique sexually. And so even earlier versions of some texts will say that there is no effect. But they do find that during ovulation, so that's the fertile period. So what precedes ovulation? Hormonally. How can you predict ovulation? The LH surge, right? You see that females are more likely. This coloring is so weird today, right? It's like green.
Hurts my eyes.
Yeah, I don't like it. It's like a neon green.
Makes me nervous.
Unplug and plug it in.
I think this is why I don't like to record my lectures, right? Laura's gonna hear all these weird things now when she listens to this recording, but it's gonna make her feel like she was here. So this is a graph showing, and so this is in heterosexual couples, and it's looking at, I think it's heterosexual couples, when the female initiated sex, and this is when the male initiated sex. And so this is the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, the midluteal phase, and the premenstrual phase, right? So this would be, the ovulatory would be the fertile time. And you'll see that the partner initiated is consistent across the cycle, but that females were much more likely to initiate during the ovulatory phase. My favorite thing about this graph is it's like percentage of time that each person initiated. And so here's 50%. And you see that nowhere does it ever add up to 100%. So I guess the other times people are just walk around naked and fall on top of each other. I don't know, but these don't add up to 100%.
I think you said that during menstruation, like a woman's hormones most resemble a man's.
During when?
Menstruation.
I don't think so, because I mean, testosterone levels would never be that high.
Yeah, but like, relatively speaking.
Of like any time throughout the cycle, is that when they're
Yeah.
most like a man's? I mean, that's probably true, but even still, I would say it's
No, I was just
fine.
wondering, because like, I know,
Have you heard people say that before?
well, yeah, because men are always like, you know, if a woman is like, ever so slightly in a bad mood, it's like, oh, are you on your period? When like, really, that's when.
Oh, that's like the least likely time.
Yeah, or well, like if.
That's where it's like most similar.
Because men are always like, oh, you're on your period, I'm not going to take you seriously, but if in reality,
What?
being on your period is when you're most like a man, it's funny.
That's what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Like-
Yeah. Have you guys heard, this is pretty unrelated, the comparison that all the concerns that people express about having a female president, like Donald Trump fits all those things, like that he's super moody and unpredictable and holds these terrible grudges and makes decisions based on emotion instead of facts, and that he like perfectly represents all of those things. Anyway,
Hilarious that that's our president.
yeah. Women are also more attracted to markers of genetic fitness during ovulation. What does genetic fitness mean in this context, do you think? Or what are some examples?
Like men who seem like they could reproduce more.
Okay.
Broad shoulders.
Okay. Symmetry,
Jawline.
dominance, yeah, like more typically masculine features.
All the changes associated with like testosterone, so like secondary sexual characteristics, like
Yeah.
shape-wise,
And including like behavioral characteristics too. Yes. And we already talked about that strippers earn more money during ovulation, although it's unclear if it's because like of a pheromonal control that's like exerted onto men, or if the strippers are actually acting differently while they're ovulating. In one study, they administered to men a gonadotropin-releasing hormone antagonist. So if you deliver a gonadotropin-releasing hormone antagonist, let's start with where is GnRH released from? The hypothalamus. And then what happens next? Okay, so the anterior pituitary is then going to release gonadotropins like FSH, LH, or whatever. And then what? What happens after that?
Into the bloodstream.
Okay.
Obviously, the testes
to release?
Testosterone.
Testosterone, right? So if you administer a GnRH, you're going to have less testosterone, right? That's like the downstream effect. So if you administer this, it's going to decrease the release of testosterone. And so what they found then is that after doing this for like a week or two, that the men, so this was like an experiment that they agreed to, had decreased sexual interest and decreased activity. Some people they gave replacement testosterone injections to at the same time. So they both got the gonadotropin-releasing hormone antagonist and replacement testosterone injections so that their testosterone levels didn't change. And they found that for them, the sexual interest and activity did not change. It remained at the level it was without administration. So that it seems that testosterone really is the driving factor there. In both males and females, thinking about sex increases testosterone level. So this is this is like all textbooks tell this story of the man on the island that shaves his beard. That's how I know if you guys read the text or not. Clearly you didn't. None of you have read the chapter?
Wait, chapter 10.
Yeah.
Oh, I read it, but I don't. Like,
You don't remember the man on the island shaving his beard?
I read it like
No.
I read it like 3 weeks ago.
So this scientist was on a isolated island. I don't know if he was like the only human on it or what. And he shaved his beard every day and would weigh his beard clippings.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
see, it's a memorable story if you read it. I've got to do more of these tests. It's like my Guinness test for statistics to see if people read the chapter.
Coolidge story.
Yeah, the Coolidge story. And what he noticed is that as he got closer, like whenever he was getting ready to leave the island, his beard would grow faster, and beard growth is determined by testosterone. And it's because he had a lady friend that he was going to visit whenever he was leaving the island. And so obviously he was thinking about sex more, and his testosterone was increasing, and so his beard was growing faster. But it's also funny that this dude was just like measuring his beard clippings, right? I think this was in the 70s. But they've seen similar things for females as well.
There's not much to do on an island.
That's true.
That's
That's
your
true.
mind busy somehow.
Shaving and measuring.
Yeah. One kind of wonders though, how did this story get out? Like, did he write a scientific article on it, or did he just
Sounds
tell
like a
enough
myth.
people?
Sounds like
It
a
does
myth.
sound like a myth, but it's in a ton of textbooks. Okay. So sexual orientation. Twin studies, if you look at males, there's a 52% concordance rate in monozygotic twins and a 22% concordance rate in dizygotic twins. So when we say concordance rate, that means if you have one twin that is gay and is a male, and they have another male twin, if they're monozygotic twins, what's the likelihood that the other twin is also gay? 52%, right? It's concordance means they have the same trait. If it's a dizygotic twin or a fraternal twin, then it's a 22% chance. The numbers are pretty similar for females. Monozygotic twins, it's 48%, and dizygotic twins, it's 16%.
So this is just like a genetic component?
Yes.
Sexual-
Is it all genetic?
Well, statistics like maximum can only be 52% genetic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a more complex statistical way that we look at that. But yeah, so what does this say about nature and nurture?
So nature is.
It's a little bit of both, right? What would these numbers look like if it was 100% nature? If it was just nature, nothing else?
All
Then the
100%
concordance rate would be 0.
be 100% for mine.
Well, it'd be 100% for monozygotic. Yeah,
100%
right.
nurture.
If it was 100% nurture, then, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be 0, but I don't know what the exact number would be. It'd be whatever the population rate is of homosexuality, right? So there has to be some sort of genetic component. What that genetic component is at this point is unknown. And if you think about it, homosexuality is extremely interesting from an evolutionary perspective, right? Because in theory, homosexuality should reduce reproductive fitness. And so what some scientists have postulated and have a little bit of evidence for is that there's some gene on the X chromosome that's associated with homosexuality, and that it also causes higher fertility in women, essentially, because they have done studies where they have seen, or a study, that females who have a male biological relative that's gay tend to have higher fertility rates than the average female. And so if you think about that, that kind of replaces that lack of reproductive fitness, right? That lack of passing on genes. And the idea is that if a male shares this, like that's his one X chromosome, right? And so if he has it, then he's gay. Whereas if a female has it, I guess I don't know if it has ideas for leading to female homosexuality, but she has another X chromosome that might override that.
Wait, how do you measure fertility rate again?
How many kids they have.
Okay.
So that, like, females who have a male, like a brother that's gay, tend to have slightly more children.
But
That's
then
what they
that's
found.
also like dependent on choice, right? Like
Culture.
Yeah, it could be, but like they've done a study where it seems like there's enough of effect.
Education.
Yeah, that there is, but they have no idea of what the gene would be, so it's theoretical. But they have seen like higher
Why
rates
does
for
it have
children,
to be a gene though?
Everything's a gene.
as opposed to.
I don't know, like something else.
like
Well, because there's some sort of nature component, so it has to be like transmitted somehow, right? So studies show that most people have their first sexual feeling somewhere around the age of 10 years old, and that in reality, a lot of people at 10, whether or not they have completely accepted it, have some idea of their sexual orientation, because that's usually directed toward a particular gender. So theories about sexuality being related or sexual orientation being related to difference in sex hormone levels do not have much support. For males, there are no differences in like testosterone levels between homosexuals and heterosexuals, so there have been no studies that have found any sort of difference in hormone levels based on sexual orientation in males. For females, that's mostly the case, but not completely. About 30% of lesbians do have elevated testosterone levels compared to the average female, but it's still much lower than you would see in males. And it's you don't really know if it's a cause or effect, right? It could be that this person was born with elevated androgens and that caused them to be homosexual. Or it could be that certain interests they have, certain behaviors they engage in lead to a rise in testosterone. For example, sort of related example, they did one study in college-age men, so like some of you, where they measured testosterone concentrations, both like kind of resting, and then they let them play with a gun and measured their testosterone concentrations again. What do you think happened when they played with a gun? It increased, right? So like there are all sorts of behaviors that increase testosterone levels.
Also,
I agree.
have they done studies where in like mice or something,
Where they let them play with guns?
no, in which they increase testosterone levels, baseline testosterone levels in female rats, and see if they exhibited homosexual behavior?
Didn't they present mounting behavior when they replaced their just?
In adults, if they then presented homosexual behavior, I don't know that they did it just in adults, but if they had it early in a critical period, yes, they would, because then it would influence brain development.
Wait, do all species exhibit homosexuality?
I don't know. Many do. But I don't know. Like I know that like at least over 300 do or something. Like a number do.
Change sex.
Hmm?
Pretty cool.
Bearded. Oh, I
Dragons,
thought you just meant like actual dragons. I mean, I think that happened in the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park too, right?
What? They changed sex yet?
Yeah, I think that's like that was the whole problem with Jurassic Park, wasn't it?
I thought they just let a dinosaur out. That's
Jurassic
I
Park
think
had
that they
one.
weren't supposed to mate, but then one like changed sex. I think they were all supposed to be female or something. I don't know. I guess I need to rewatch Jurassic Park.
They sold it.
It's a good movie.
Original trilogy?
I think so.
It's been a while.
I haven't seen him in a long time. I didn't see the most recent one either. Jurassic World.
Was good.
Was it? Okay. So what seems to be more likely is that there's differences in prenatal exposure to hormones that influence sexual orientation. And we really have more data about this for females. So there's a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And basically what happens in this condition is people have low cortisol release from the adrenal cortex. So this is kind of the the starting point of what happens. Because hormonal control occurs via negative feedback loops, if you have low cortisol release from the adrenal cortex, what's gonna happen to like ACTH or something like that? If there's not enough cortisol, what's your body gonna try to do? Increase cortisol, right? So you're gonna have higher levels of other hormones. Testosterone and other androgens are released from the adrenal cortex. So what happens in response to this low levels of cortisol is you actually have higher androgen released, right? Because it's part of this negative feedback loop where your body's basically trying to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release more hormones. So you end up with higher levels of testosterone, increased androgen release. And so this starts potentially prenatally. It does start prenatally. What consequence would this have on males if they have higher than average testosterone release?
Just like more secondary sexual characteristics.
Once they get to puberty, yeah.
And also like excess testosterone will break into estrogen, and they'll have gynecomastia.
Yeah, I don't think they do tend to have gynecomastia, but that is true. Yes, testosterone aromatizes into estrogen. For males, basically, they enter puberty a little bit earlier, not as early as this baby and beard would apply. I just thought it was a funny picture.
That's not real, right?
No, it's not real. I actually get asked that a lot with this picture.
I only see what the color is like. It's Photoshop.
Oh yeah, I've already forgotten that the color's all weird today. So it doesn't really have, so it occurs in males, but the consequences aren't really that noticeable. For females, the consequences can be much more severe, although there's a wide variety of severity. So females, and this can be noticed at birth, because there can be basically genital abnormalities. So females can have an enlarged clitoris and partially fused labia. They have normally functioning gonads because the androgen release is too late for that Wolffian system to have developed, so this extra androgen release. But sometimes people with severe forms of, women with severe forms of congenital adrenal hyperplasia, like, are considered to basically have ambiguous genitalia at birth. So we'll get to that in a second.
It's congenital adrenal hyperplasia, but it's low cortisol release?
But then you have high adrenal release of androgens. So what they see of females with this, CAH is the abbreviation, so it's usually diagnosed at birth. Not every, again, there's a wide range of severities for this, so not everyone would have ambiguous genitalia, but some do. So what would you do now? You say you diagnose this at birth. What do you do now if you want to, in a female, try to correct their, so that they have normal levels of androgens now? What can you do? There's actually a pretty simple fix.
Well, increase cortisol.
Yeah, you administer cortisol, right? If you administer cortisol, then they should have normal cortisol, and then that should put their androgens back into release because it's not like this overstimulation anymore. But even if they do that right after birth, there was this prenatal exposure, and so that has influenced brain development. What you see is that girls with CAH are more likely than other female relatives, cousins or sisters they look at, to choose male toys over female toys. So this is going to, well, none of you guys thought that gender was only socialization, so it's not going to surprise you. But there really does seem to be a difference in toy preference that's not just based on like parental pressures, where girls are more interested in like dolls and pots, and boys are more interested in like things that are more active and move. They even see this in monkeys, that like female baby monkeys and male baby monkeys choose different types of toys that are similar to what you would see for boys and girls and humans, like this more active versus more passive. So socialization certainly like increases the discrepancy in toy choice, I'm sure, but there does seem to be like a biological basis here. And some of the researchers that looked at this study where they see that females with CAH are more likely to choose male toys over female toys than like their sisters, think that it's an even larger effect than what is observed, because it was common for parents that had a daughter with this to like really try to push them towards the girl toys, right? So even with this like outside pressure to be with the girl toys, they still wanted the boy toys more often. About a third of women with this identify as bisexual or homosexual, so it's higher than you would have in the general population. Oh, do I not have? Oh, okay. I guess thought I did have that. But again, there are different levels of severity of this. So what they actually frequently do, I guess I thought I had this on a slide, but I don't. What a number of parents decide is that they, depending on how different the genitalia is, a lot of times they surgically correct genitalia after birth. If the labia are fused, they will like unfuse them. And so it's really just a like cosmetic thing, though. It wouldn't make any changes. The only thing that's really changing anything is administering the cortisol.
So like hormonal sex change procedures, do they also imply like if someone wants to change their biological female gender into male gender, do
they take testosterone?
they do the same physiology thing as like what happens in a CAH case? Like how did this start? Like
They take.
just like increase?
They take. I think they mainly just take testosterone.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they do anything else. I think they mainly just give them testosterone. Yeah. I mean, they don't like give them cortisol or anything. In males, a fraternal birth order effect has been observed. And what this means is that they have noticed, that some studies have found, that the more biological older brothers someone has by the same mother, so it has to be a brother from the same mother that is older and like is biologically related, that there's an increased likelihood that like the youngest male will be gay. So it has to specifically be older brothers from the same mother, and they have to be a genetic relative.
Some Friday thing.
I think it might be. Yeah, I think it is. There's a lot of older brothers in that one, right? What'd you say?
Is this something Freud would comment on why this happens?
I'm sure Freud would. People that are more physiologically minded hypothesize that there's a possibility that the mother's immune system starts to have some sort of immunity to like a masculinizing hormone, which could be something related to androgen exposure to birth. And so that after more exposure to it, right, with more pregnancies with male babies, that the immune system might have some response that influences how the immune system responds to the fetus and may influence development of the brain a little bit.
Also take into account mediations by like age of the mother if she's having these children down the line.
That's a good question. I haven't read any that have, but I mean, for example, I don't think that they find this effect if it's a boy that has like 5 older sisters, right? Like it's particularly they have to have older brothers, which makes it seem like there's something about like carrying a male child that causes it. And it doesn't make us in it if it's adopted older brothers or something, that doesn't seem to make a difference either. So I could see that being a factor, but because of the specificity of what it has to be, I think it's probably not, but it could be.
There was this study I read earlier about the sibling order, and the study was on like pro male athletes, like the birth order, and like the highest like quartile of them were like the firstborn males in the family.
Really, a lot of them are firstborn males. Interesting.
But that could relate to like testosterone levels,
Yeah.
which like pretty much dictate your performance in sports.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I also wonder how it relates to dominance hierarchies. I think dominance hierarchies are interesting. So looking at the brain, there are no clear differences in structures related to sexual orientation. So there's not a brain scan that you can do. You can't do like a brain scan of different areas and see anything that's going to correlate, at least as far as we know, with sexual orientation. What one study has shown is that there is a difference in response to pheromones, or chemicals we think are, but it might not be because just this. Did I post this article in The Economist about these same chemicals? Did I end up posting it? I don't know if I did. No, I didn't. So there's I'm trying to remember chemical and then estrogen-like chemical. I don't remember exactly which ones they are. But if you expose people to this androgen-like chemical, you put it like you swab it under their lip, you will see one brain activity pattern for heterosexual females. And you will see a similar brain activity pattern for homosexual males to this like essentially male pheromone.
With brain activity better as measured by what?
Like fMRI.
fMRI?
Yeah. Similarly, heterosexual males would have a totally different response to it than homosexual males or heterosexual female. A similar thing for an estrogen-like chemical, where you see one pattern of brain activity in heterosexual men and homosexual female. They'll show similar levels or similar patterns of brain activity. So that seems to be like, this is the pheromone of the gender I'm attracted to, basically the sex I'm attracted to. So you do see a different profile of brain responses based on sexual orientation, but not any structural differences based on sexual orientation. But then these two chemicals in this Economist article, they just tried something with them, and I can't remember. I think it was something with and they didn't find any pattern, which made them say they're not pheromones. Here it is. Where they showed them a computer-generated androgynous face, and they said if it was more likely male or female. And so that was one test people did. And the other was that they had to rate members of the opposite sex in photographs for their attractiveness and likelihood of being faithful. And so people were swabbed with either kind of the androgen-like one or the estrogen-like one. It's androstatin, I've never known how to pronounce that, and estrotetranol. And they said if these were pheromones, then people should, like if women have, I think all their participants were heterosexual. If women were given the androgen-like one, then they should be more likely to see the androgynous face as male, and they should rate the males in the pictures as more attractive, basically. And same for the men, when they were given the estrogen-like one, they should see things as more female and rate the people more attractively. And they had a placebo control. And they didn't find either of those things, which makes them think that those are not pheromones, and that you should not buy perfume based on pheromones. I'd heard things, I didn't know those really existed though. Yeah.
I don't know if it's true, but somewhere I heard that if you wear certain perfumes, you're more likely to get attacked in the forest by an animal.
Did you hear that in Anchorman?
I have no idea. I mean, I think it would make sense if there's something pheromone related.
I mean, I could see that there could be, depending on what the chemical would be,
Because
but like an animal
some
pheromone, yeah.
perfumes do use animal hormones in them, right?
Maybe, I don't know. I guess, probably. The ones that say they're pheromones, they probably are like animal pheromones.
Is there one that's like a beaver gland?
They use a lot of things from animals.
Yeah. Okay, you look that up and get back to us. So there are sexual differences in the brain, and they seem to be, as far as we know, caused by different exposure to androgens prenatally. Some things that you will see is male brains are more lateralized, and what does that mean?
Localized behavior to one side.
Right. So there's fewer connections between the hemispheres for males than there are for females. This is problematic when it comes to strokes. So males are more likely to have a language deficit after stroke than females, because it's thought that language, for example, might be slightly more shared by both hemispheres in females than it is in males. What'd you find?
So there are actually, and there was the Wildlife Conservation Society research at the Bronx who found that captive cheetahs were attracted to Calvin Klein's obsession for men fragrance.
Really?
And other scents were tested in the wild to see if big cats would approach camera traps used for behavioral studies. So they do approach some specific scent perfumes which imply animal pheromones.
That's interesting.
So, yeah.
That's fun.
So if we were having this conversation in the 70s, right? It's likely, and if we were having this conversation in the 70s at Johns Hopkins, I would be telling you, was that more specific information than you were expecting? That there is no difference between males and females. There's no difference in brain structure. Sexual roles are all learned. Okay?
In the 70s.
At Johns Hopkins, yes. So like that was like starting to be the prevailing view of like scientists. So I'm gonna come back to Johns Hopkins. It wasn't totally random. Are you guys familiar with the John Joan case? This is David Reimer. I was gonna call him Brenner. Okay. I can't remember if they talked about it in your textbook or not. So it's a terrible case. It's terrible tragedy, but like terrible tragedies, sometimes it works out well for science, right? The Stanford prison experiment, the Milgram experiment, this is along those lines. So basically, there are these two male twins from Canada, and they were being circumcised, but not right after birth, like a couple months later. And in one of them, they totally botched it. And they were using this cauterizing thing, and basically they just burned off his penis. Okay, he's like, I think 3 months old, 3 or 6 months old. So basically what you now have is two identical twins, right? And one is going to develop normally. The other is developing without a penis. And so when this happened, the parents consulted a number of people. One of the people that they consulted was at Johns Hopkins, and his last name is Money. And the treatment that they suggested and that they went with was basically raise him as a female. So what they did was they castrated him, they surgically created a vagina for him, and then they said, okay, around puberty we'll administer estrogen. And so this is like a perfect example, right? A perfect case study of the nature-nurture debate because he had this identical twin as well. So you could see what happened with his identical twin. So the parents like put him in dresses and really like pushed it, like always told him he was a girl, really pushed him towards like female gender roles and everything. And if you read the report by his primary physician at Johns Hopkins, named Money, he said that gender orientation is all nurture. There's no nature, and that this was a wild success and a total proof that it's all just nurture and it's all whatever you tell someone they are. However, if you were to have talked to David Reimer or read his book, because he wrote, or he provided, I don't think he wrote it himself, I think someone wrote it for him, a memoir, you will see that that was not true at all. And so the book, and I highly recommend it, I think it's a really interesting book to read. It's called As Nature Made Him. And it basically, this author wrote it in collaboration with David. So when David first decided to tell his story, what publication do you think? Because it was first like a magazine article. What publication do you think he went to?
Rolling Stone.
Did you just guess that, or do you already know?
I read it.
Oh, it
It's on
was.
the slide.
Oh, okay. Right, it's very cool though, right? I actually remember reading this in Rolling Stone a really long time ago. Basically, even though this is him and a girl, him in a dress as a girl, he showed masculine behavior from a very early age. He always wanted to play with boy toys. He even suspected that he was a boy because he felt so different and so unhappy. He didn't really have friends. He was teased by his classmates because he just didn't fit into anything of being like a girl. Even when he would go to the bathroom, he would like stand up when he peed, and he didn't have a penis. Like he in every way, pretty much, he acted like a boy, and he was unhappy that he was a girl, and he did not feel like he was a girl. At age 12, they started giving him estrogen to feminize his body. Throughout his childhood, he and his brother would every year go to Johns Hopkins to visit Money, their physician that was advising all the treatments. And this was just like a sick guy, as far as I'm concerned. Because among other things, because the twins never wanted to go, because he thought that one of the best ways to really instill gender roles in these brothers, right, these are siblings, and this was like at the age of 8 this was happening, was for them to simulate sex with each other.
Wait, what?
This guy,
Yes.
when he wasn't arrested,
No. I mean, I don't think he made them act. I mean, they didn't. But like, still. But like, like, so he would make them do things like that, and so of course they never wanted to go. Yeah,
Science was so cool.
I know.
Still torturing.
And so he was super unhappy, and eventually he had a conversation with his parents, and like they finally like came clean. Like he was around 14, and so at that point he decided to live as a boy, and his parents allowed it, and they said you know they told him you are a boy. This is what happened. So what do they have to do now? Okay, so they give him androgen treatment. They have to do a mastectomy because he'd been given estrogens, and so his body had become somewhat feminized. Sorry, did you guys see this attack in Sweden this morning? There's a terrorist attack in Sweden this morning, and one of my really good friends lives in Stockholm, so she's been texting me all day. She's been stuck and felt unsafe, and then also hasn't been able to go home because like they shut down all of the public transportation. But she just got a cab, so that's good. So then they had to create a penis. So he was heterosexual. He was attracted to women. He ended up marrying a woman, and he helped raise her kids. He wasn't fertile because they had removed anything he would need to reproduce. But all things considered, he lived a very unhappy life, and he committed suicide.
That's not the ending to that story.
I know.
I expected whatsoever. It's like the prisoner who got out of jail and committed suicide.
It was after a while. I mean, it was after a while. I think he lived as a man for over 10 years before he committed suicide. But I mean, he was terribly depressed. I think that whole experience obviously had a very negative impact on him.
Didn't receive any punishment for that.
No.
I call it malpractice.
He's still alive.
Probably not. I think he was old. But also his reports of this whole thing was that it was a wild success too, and that this guy was happy as a girl. But so this is also one of the things that shows us, like, they're really clearly, it's not just socialization, right? Something happened, because he started being raised as a girl from like 3 months, 6 months, I can't remember, old. So they're really clearly, his brain had already been masculinized. Something had happened prenatally that identified his brain as being male. And that was like strongly felt by him. And there was no way that was going to change. And so we don't know what all those things are, but we do know of some brain regions that are involved. They've actually found two regions that are associated with gender identity, specifically gender identity. Most brain, generally when we're talking about the brain and we're talking about anything about sex, we're usually going to be talking about the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is involved. So now we're going to mostly go back to animal research again. The hypothalamus is involved in copulatory behaviors, right? We know it controls gonadotropin release because it releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone. We have found, and this is in the hypothalamus, a specific region, 2 areas that are associated with gender identity. The Benn nucleus of the stria terminalis, or the BNST, and the uncinate nucleus, which is in the medial preoptic area. And basically, these areas are larger in males than they are in females. And the reason we know it's associated with gender identity is because in people who were born male but always identified as female, this structure is the size of a genetic female. And in people who were born female but always identified as a male, this structure is the size of a genetic male, basically. So there are 2 brain regions that have specifically been associated with gender identity. Isn't that interesting?
Have they tried to like influence?
To change it? I don't think that's going to happen.
I mean, you could do some genetic manipulation.
In humans?
No.
Well, but how do you measure gender identity in animals? I don't think that's going to work as well.
Are there any like studies on like asexuality? Like, is there like a
I haven't read any.
Like, biologically exists? Yeah. Like,
I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, the only public persona I've heard claim they're asexual is Morrissey, but then it turned out Morrissey like had relationships with men. So, you guys know who Morrissey is? The Smiths? No? No?
I don't think I've ever
Some
met
musician?
an asexual person.
Alanis Morrissey?
No. Morrissey and Alanis Morissette are two totally different people. Almost hilariously so. Okay. So the area that has been most studied, right? I'm sure you can appreciate that it's very difficult to study areas of the brain involved in sexual behavior in humans. Like if you try to think of the studies you would be designing, they're going to be weird, okay? And the people that will participate in those studies may or may not be reflective of the human population. So animal studies, like, we know a pretty decent amount about what happens when mice and rats have sex. And one thing that we know is that there's an area in the hypothalamus called the medial preoptic area that seems to be particularly important for male sexual behavior in rodents. If they electrically stimulate this area of the brain, the guy will just basically go look for a partner. If they just measure the rate of firing or the production of FOS, for example, during sexual activity, it's going to increase a lot in this area. If they destroy it, so if they do like an excitotoxic lesion or something here, then they're going to see that this animal no longer is going to, they're going to see that this animal is no longer going to engage in sexual behavior. And so before we talked about if you castrate a mouse, it stops like mounting, right? That's one of the easy things to measure behaviorally. It stops mounting. But if you give it replacement injections of testosterone, then it'll start engaging in mounting behavior again, right? This particularly happens if you directly inject that into the medial preoptic area. You can see that you can reinstate sexual behavior in a castrated mouse if you inject testosterone directly into the medial preoptic area.
So if you lesion the medial preoptic area and inject testosterone, you won't have any.
I would say you would not see sexual behavior because that you would need the medial preoptic area to do it. So if you totally destroy it, then it's done. So the sexually dimorphic nucleus is also in the hypothalamus. This is larger in males, sometimes 7 times larger in males than females. And its size seems to be specifically controlled by androgen release prenatally. And this seems to be related to behavior as well, because it seems like lesions also decrease masculine sexual behavior. So you would see like less mounting, for example, if you lesion this area. And so there's a sexually dimorphic nucleus in humans as well, where it's much larger in males than it is in females. I don't want to go into all the details in this diagram just because I don't want to add too much more to what we've been talking about. But what I will mention briefly, oh God, I keep forgetting this terrible color. So you do have input, so you remember the vomeronasal organ, right? What's that? What is that near?
The what?
Vomeronasal organ?
That's
It's near the olfactory bulb, right? That seems to be an important place in rodents for pheromones, for sensing pheromones. So it sends projections to the medial amygdala, which sends projections to the medial preoptic area. So this is the area I was just talking about in the hypothalamus. And so this is kind of the pathway whereby the pheromones are believed to control sexual behavior. The medial preoptic area also gets tactile information from the genitals and then can send some inhibitory pathways, if necessary, down kind of towards the midbrain.
Did you just call the nose the nasal organ?
The vomeronasal organ is a specific part in the... No, I would just say nose. In females, there's a slightly different area called the ventromedial nucleus that seems to be particularly related to female sexual behavior. So if they lesion this, so lordosis again is this posture that female rats make. That's a sexually receptive posture. If you lesion it, if you lesion the ventromedial nucleus, they won't show lordosis anymore, and they may actually physically attack their suitors. So they might become hostile. If you electrically stimulate it, you'll see that it elicits sexual behavior, so they might show lordosis more often. What hormones would you expect to inject to this area if you wanted to influence behavior? Estrogen and progesterone. Which one has to go first? Do you remember? Estrogen goes first. So if you inject estradiol and then progesterone a while later, you'll see a stimulation of sexual behavior. And the reason, so we see, right, when we looked at the graph of the menstrual cycle, the estrous cycle is similar, right? You have an increase in estrogen and then later progesterone after ovulation. And it seems that what the estrogen does is increase the expression of progesterone receptors, so that progesterone is then able to have a greater effect because there are more receptors available. So it can cause the number of receptors to increase by like 150%, right? So that's over doubling the number of progesterone receptors available. If instead you put a progesterone antagonist directly into that brain area, it'll disrupt sexual behavior. So this also sends a track to the periaqueductal gray. So the periaqueductal gray is also, it seems, related to sexual behavior, more female than male. And if you destroy the path leading between the ventromedial nucleus and the periaqueductal gray, it will eliminate female sexual behavior.
Periaqueductal gray is line of the receptor. It's a place of, if you remove that area, it causes agony or pain.
I would think so, yeah.
That's interesting.
So again, I'm not going to go into all of this, but you see again the input from the vomeronasal organ, right? Received some from the medial amygdala, and now this is the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus. So it's slightly different, but this is where you get the influence of pheromones. You also get tactile information from the genitals, and then it can have some kind of downstream effects too. Okay, pair bonds. So pair bonding is like basically looking at monogamy, right? It's not something you see in a lot of species, but about 5% of mammalian species show monogamous bonds. And what has been most studied to look at here are prairie voles. Have you guys heard of prairie voles before?
Yeah.
In the context of pair bonding? It's usually the only reason people talk about them.
Are they-
Voles. They're like little rodents.
Yeah, they're like a mole, right?
No, they're different than moles. I mean, they look like this. These are prairie voles. They look like little mice. They're little tiny things. The reason that they study them is because prairie voles, the specific type of voles, are monogamous, whereas what are the other meadow voles? I don't remember what the other type is, but like all other voles basically are polygamous. And so you can look at this one subspecies of voles basically that's monogamous to try to see how is it different than these other species that are not monogamous. What do you see differently in behavior, in brain and hormone concentrations? And it seems that pair bonding is primarily related to posterior pituitary hormones, right? So we've been talking mainly about the anterior pituitary this whole time. But the two posterior pituitary hormones, which are vasopressin and oxytocin, seem to be potentially responsible for pair bonding. Vasopressin being more important in males and oxytocin being more important in females. So you see in males there are more receptors for vasopressin in the forebrain if they're monogamous than if they're polygamous, meaning that prairie voles, which are monogamous, males have more vasopressin receptors than I think it's the meadow voles that are not monogamous. Mating activates these vasopressin releasing neurons. And if you administer an antagonist, a vasopressin antagonist, to male prairie voles, they don't form pair bonds anymore. You see a similar pattern of results for females with oxytocin, that mating stimulates the release of oxytocin. If you inject them with oxytocin, they are more likely to form a pair bond. And if you inject an oxytocin antagonist, they are unlikely to form a pair bond. They've also, and this is actually really interesting, they've done some studies where they took polygamous species of voles, I think metavoles, and they increase the expression of vasopressin receptors in the forebrain, and they then become monogamous. Interesting, isn't it? So other effects that oxytocin has in humans. So when is oxytocin released?
Childbirth.
Childbirth, orgasm, breastfeeding, bonding, sex, all of those things. So that's why it's considered the bonding hormone. Studies that have looked at administration of oxytocin find that people report relaxation and reduced anxiety. Oxytocin is supposed to negatively modulate cortisol, so it should decrease cortisol concentrations. Some studies have found that oxytocin is associated with a decrease in pain sensitivity.
Any relation to oxycodone or oxycodone?
No,
No, right?
because those are opiates.
Yeah.
But like frequently confused words, definitely.
It's nature's. No.
I guess if you administer, I'm trying to remember this study. I remember parts of it. If you administer oxytocin to the ventral tegment, if you administer it to people, you will see that in women, they have greater activation of the ventral tegmental area, right, which is part of the reward pathway, to a crying infant and to sexual images. And then they've done studies in men where they administer oxytocin, and they see that that's associated with greater trust.
Isn't oxytocin released during labor too?
Yeah. Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, like uterine contractions.
in like one bioethics class, there was this discussion about the potential cure for like children neglect is
Is
like
oxytocin?
administration. So they
They've
do-
also looked at it in autism, of administering oxytocin to people with autism, I know. To make them more like sociable. I don't know if it's worked, but
Vince's E7, we talked about like
Yeah, that one.
like giving. I think it would make like giving mothers like oxytocin, to make them. Yeah.
Make them like their kids.
Yeah.
interesting.
It's kind of scary.
Would it work?
Like
Maybe.
Like Vince was saying, like if you had like a colicky baby, they just like would not stop crying.
That you could potentially
Yeah.
do that. Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about okay. What forms is energy delivered in? From food.
It'll break down glucose.
You, right, so you have like lipids, amino acids, glucose, right? Lipids are obviously fats, amino acids are breakdown products of proteins. Glucose is simple sugar, which is the breakdown product of complex carbohydrates. How can energy be stored? Fat, triglycerides, which is glycerol and fatty acids. If someone is incredibly obese, do they have more fat cells than someone who's incredibly thin? They're just bigger, right? So the number of fat cells that people have doesn't ultimately change, just the size of them do. So triglycerides are stored in cells that expand. What is glycogen? Where does it come from? Glucose, right? So triglycerides are really more of a long-term storage option, and glycogen is more of a short-term storage. So it's glucose is converted into glycogen. So those are some basics to go forward. When we talk about energy metabolism, we talk about three main phases that are associated with different, like, psychological processes, and then also different concentrations of things like insulin and glucagon. So there is the cephalic phase, which is associated with the preparation for eating. And this is triggered by like the sight of food, the smell of food, thought of food, things like that. I have a popcorn maker here because I think, what do you think are the two foods that if you smell, you just like have to have? I think there are two. One is popcorn, I think. Oranges is my other one. Don't you just like always want oranges when you smell them?
Chicken nuggets.
Are you serious?
No.
I'm vegetarian, so no.
Like whipped cream.
Can you smell whipped cream?
Yes.
Really?
Chinese food gets me every time.
MSG.
Okay. Well, to me, popcorn and oranges are the things that if you smell, you're just like, I really want them.
Popcorn, definitely, I can understand that.
Not
Not
chocolate.
oranges.
I think chocolate doesn't have a strong
Not-
smell.
yeah, it does not have a strong smell.
I mean, if I see chocolate, I want it, but
Or like cookies.
yeah, I for some reason though the smell of oranges and popcorn cause the strongest, like just the smell. They cause the strongest cephalic phase for me.
Must be some conditioning.
Well, most people feel this way about popcorn, right? Maybe the oranges are the weird one, but most people feel this way about popcorn.
Either.
You don't like popcorn?
No.
It's not
But I
that
think
great.
it's like classical conditioning, like going into movie theater, it's like you really have to get popcorn if you're gonna watch a movie.
But see, I almost never get popcorn at the movie theater.
So
You
rip
get
off.
candy at the movie theater.
I don't get. I don't buy anything.
Buy
usually.
$6 movie ticket and pay $8 for the popcorn.
Yeah, you just smuggle something in.
I just usually get burritos in from Lomax and just eat.
I may or may not know people who just take like little boxes of wine in.
A box of one.
You can get like little ones like that are like that.
I'll look out for those.
You just get a straw. Shouldn't have said that on the day I'm recording this. I don't do that. I've just heard people say they do that.
May or may not.
The absorptive phase is the process in which energy is actually, or the timing when energy is actually absorbed into the bloodstream. And so during this time, the energy that's being absorbed meets the body's immediate energy needs. And then there's the fasting phase, which is when all the unstored energy, so the energy that's just kind of traveling around your bloodstream has been used, and so now you have to withdraw energy from reserves, okay? So we're going to use these terms when we're talking about concentrations of insulin and glucagon and how they influence energy use and storage. So, insulin is, well, what is insulin? Actually, it's probably here, okay. Insulin's highest during the cephalic and absorptive phases, okay? So when your body is preparing for delivery of nutrients and when nutrients are actually kind of entering your bloodstream. One of the things that insulin does is promote glucose use as an energy source. Do you guys know how it does this? Do you know the role of insulin and glucose?
Through receptors to allow glucose into the cell.
Right. So for most cells in your body, glucose cannot enter the cell unless insulin is present. It's not this way in the brain, though. The brain's different. Insulin also promotes the conversion of energy to storage. So it promotes glucose to be converted to glycogen, which can be stored in the liver and muscle, as well as fat, which can be associated in adipose tissue. It is very common for me on an exam to say, what are the primary,
Phases.
no, not phases. Like, what does insulin do? I'm trying to think of the wording I use, but what are the primary things that insulin does? So it promotes glucose use as an energy source and conversion of energy to storage. Glucagon, on the other hand, is highest during the fasting phase. And so insulin's low during the fasting phase. So what happens then? If insulin's low, what happens with glucose in cells?
Glucose uptake is diminished.
Right. So if insulin's low, glucose doesn't easily enter cells. So the glucose then is not your primary fuel, because if you were only going to keep one part of your body going, what would it be? Your brain, right? So glucose is then saved for the brain, because the brain cannot really use other fuel sources. Also, the brain doesn't need insulin for glucose to be able to enter cells. So all the glucose available during the fasting phase, most of it, is saved for the brain, basically. And so then what has to happen now? What do we need to do?
Break down long-term storages and short-term storages.
Okay, we need to have what the long term is gluconeogenesis. We need to create glucose. So you convert stored forms of energy to glucose. So glycogen is converted to glucose. And then triglycerides, which have been stored in adipose tissue, are broken down. And so free fatty acids can be used, and then glycerol can also be converted into glucose for the brain. So this here showing, here's glucose, here's glycogen, right? In the presence of insulin, glucose converts to glycogen, and in the presence of glucagon, glycogen converts back into glucose. Where are these insulin and glucagon secreted from? Pancreas, right? And it seems that both the pancreas and the brain can detect these changes in glucose. Okay, so this is, again, summarizing what we just did. So here's your cephalic phase and your absorptive phase, right? So cephalic phase, you're kind of preparing for a meal. Absorptive phase is you're consuming or right after you've consumed a meal. So your body is preparing in the cephalic phase for the delivery of energy, and in the absorptive phase, you're using the available energy and putting some into storage. So you have high levels of insulin and low levels of glucagon. So you're going to use blood glucose as your energy source. You're going to convert glucose into stored forms of energy. So you can put it into glycogen and fat. You're going to convert amino acids into proteins. Glycogen is going to be stored in the liver and the muscles. And you're not going to have breakdown, right? You're not going to convert glycogen back into glucose when you have high insulin and low glucagon. In the fasting phase, all the energy that was kind of circulating in your blood has basically been used, so now you need to take energy from storage. Insulin levels are low and glucagon levels are high. So now glucose is not going to necessarily be the primary fuel because you need to save that for your brain. The brain cells do not need insulin in order for glucose to enter them. So high levels of glucagon, you're now going to be taking energy out of storage. So fats are going to be converted into free fatty acids and glycerol, which can then be converted into glucose. Glycogen is going to be converted into glucose. And you're not going to be trying to put more things into storage. You're taking things out of storage, right? So this is looking at how nutrients are received and how they are utilized or stored, right? So here's glucose. Glucose is used by the brain for energy, right? It can also be stored as glycogen in the liver. This is more of a short-term storage so that it can easily be taken out. Or it can be stored in muscles, or it can be stored in fat. This is like the absorptive phase. Here's the fasting phase. When you hit the fasting phase, the glycogen from the liver is converted back to glucose and is basically saved for the brain. Fat, when you take in, is mainly stored into triglycerides, right? You have triglycerides stored in adipose tissue. During your fasting phase, that's going to be broken down into fatty acids, which can be used by muscles for energy, and then glycerol, which can be converted into glucose for the brain. And then you have your amino acids that can be stored by muscles or stored in triglycerides, and again, can be broken down in that way.
How does chronic fasting influence?
How does what?
Chronic fasting influence the process if you're not taking in a daily meal?
Your body will start to use calories more efficiently. I don't know exactly how that process works. But I mean, you're going to be taking things from storage. The difficulty is that you might start taking more from muscles, yeah, which can have a negative impact in the long term.
Toxic thing that goes that happens when you break down fat tissue, adipose tissue.
I don't think so. Like what?
A toxic byproduct of lipolysis.
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe there is. But then, like, whenever people lost weight, that'd be a problem, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you're losing too much.
Like if you're losing too much.
Too much of your fat storage is that's normally a problem associated with malnutrition. Because you need adequate adipose.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, I think fasting-based diets are not healthy. Because I have a lot of friends that are trying to do those right now, and they don't believe me when I say they're not healthy. But so I guess we could have introduced this as this. really, when you think about it, at the core of, I think, did we talk about homeostasis when we talked about stress?
Yeah.
Okay. So homeostasis, like eating is all about trying to preserve homeostasis, right? Like that's why what most studies will show is that eating small amounts frequently is probably associated with the best long-term health, because really eating is a stress to your body, right? It's not something you shouldn't do, but whenever you consume calories, you're throwing off the balance of homeostasis, right? It's something that your body, it's like a change that occurs in your body that you have to adapt to. And so doing like small meals, it's less of a large change than large meals. And so there is, I don't know if I have this in my later things, there's definitely studies about how caloric restriction is good and is associated with fewer diseases and a longer lifespan. But caloric restriction is not necessarily the same as fasting, right? Like caloric restriction is reducing your overall intake as opposed to having long periods where you're taking in nothing. And then when you do eat again, it's an even larger stress to your body. And they see that that's one small part that might help to maintain one of many things, some eating disorders like with anorexia, because when people go so long without eating or with eating very little, then they eat a meal, it's like particularly unpleasant because essentially their body's not prepared for it. So I'm anti-fasting diets.
How
Why?
does it relate to like what the meal is? 'Cause, like, I mean, the schools are always eat breakfast. You need to eat breakfast. You need to eat breakfast. But then I feel like I've read like stories of people who are like, oh, well, I stopped eating breakfast and like exercised for 3 hours in the morning and then ate a giant meal and I lost like a ton of weight.
So I think that
But
so some of the studies of like eating fewer meals find that people just consume less calories. Like I think it's really just all about calories.
So whether or not you eat breakfast. Is
A number of studies have found that eating breakfast is healthy for you because you have to basically take yourself out of the fasting phase. And the longer you're in the fasting phase, the more efficiently your body uses calories. And so, and I don't know what the process is that has to do with efficiency, but you're basically going to burn calories at a higher rate if you eat some breakfast than if you eat no breakfast.
also depends on what goal you have.
Yes.
To reach your body. Like,
Yeah.
skipping breakfast to like gain like strength or power is like the worst idea ever.
Yeah,
Breakfast really the most important.
I don't know.
Technically. 'cause
I mean, to
you're
some
just, like-
degree, yes, but I don't think class is over, by the way. But I don't think I have a lot of opinions. I read a lot about nutrition. I don't think that like. I think eating breakfast as a dichotomy is one of the most important things. Although I didn't start eating breakfast till I got to college, but I think like my breakfast is like fruit, yogurt, and walnuts. I'm not like I'm gonna eat eggs in the morning or like something really heavy, but I'm going to eat something and I'm going to give myself
Eggs are
enough
bad.
energy. Yeah. Are eggs not heavy to you guys?
I mean, it depends on the number of eggs.
I can like eat like
Like 6
7
eggs would
eggs
be
in
heavy
like,
for
in like
2,
one
not
meal.
so much.
I don't actually I don't dislike eating in the morning. I'm just like not a big morning eater, but I do
Yeah, same.
think it's good to eat in the
Takes
morning,
me,
so I
like,
eat fruit.
Hour to like get hungry because like my stomach just hurts when I
Yeah.
just drink a lot of water.
And I'm particularly sensitive to like sugar in the morning. Like it very easily makes me feel nauseous. So.
Is there something related to eating behavior, like your behavior of eating, and whether or not you'll be more susceptible to not being able to keep down your food?
You mean like if you scarf it all down?
Yeah, like the rate of your eating, the
there some lab
frequency of your
reports?
eating, is it all factored together?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know though. See you later.
Like when I go a long periods with eating like one meal a day,
Mm-hmm.
and then I try to eat breakfast, it just doesn't work. It just won't stay down, no matter what it is.
It probably is then that it's like a threat to your homeostasis. Like your body's rejecting it 'cause it's like a threat to your homeostasis because your body hasn't prepared for that meal. Because time of day, if you eat at regular times of day, can become like a Pavlovian cue to prepare your body for the delivery of calories. So you'll like release more insulin, for example, so that your body is prepared to break down those calories or to store those calories. And if your body's unprepared for it, it's like a bigger stress to your body, and your body's not going to deal with it as well.